Hello everyone, welcome to John Redmann, Power of Attorney, the show that aims to empower you through increasing your knowledge of the law. I'm attorney John Redmann.
And I'm Shauna Sanford. Well, the BP oil spill is a subject that hits close to home for many of you out there. And today, we're going to focus on the class action lawsuits that involve thousands and thousands of residents and businesses, John.
And we're happy to have with us again Val Exnicios. He's going to discuss the case, and it's a lawsuit that Val is very involved in. And he says it's the most complicated and unique litigation in history. We invite you to join the conversation by submitting your questions. There are several ways to do that, and all of the information is on your screen. Val's been involved in some very high-profile cases around the nation, and he says he's never seen anything like this BP case. Why is that, Val? Tell us why is this case so unique?
Thank you, John. Thank you, Shauna. Happy to be here. The BP settlement, a proposed settlement, is in fact unique in my experience. First off, the causation requirement is not there. You don't have to prove that your damages were actually caused as a result of the Deepwater Horizon oil spill. That in itself makes it unique. Secondly, the folks that are in charge of administering the fund, in paying out the money, are actually charged by the judge to do everything they can possibly do to maximize the amount of the money that an individual business or an individual claimant is going to receive or would receive pursuant to the settlement. That too is unique. Never in my experience have you had the combination of no need to prove causation, that is, no need to prove that your damages were actually caused as a result of the oil spill, and you have the folks administering the plan who are, because it's unlimited in many respects, seeking to maximize the amount of the settlement money that the folks would be receiving.
And how many people are we talking about? How many businesses, how many individuals are we?
Right. BP estimates that there's approximately 600,000 businesses that are eligible and 4.5 million individuals. So you're talking about a proposed settlement class in excess of 5 million claimants.
Right, but you said you don't have to actually prove that the oil spill caused your problems, but isn't that the whole point of the lawsuit?
One would think, but again, Shauna, we're not talking about a lawsuit. We're not talking about the merits of the case.
Okay.
We're talking about a settlement that has been negotiated, purportedly arm's length,
okay,
right, between the plaintiff steering committee,
right,
those lawyers appointed by the judge to represent the claimants, and BP. So what we're talking about is a compromise, a settlement that the two sides have come together and are recommending to the court to approve. Lots of folks are objecting to it, but nonetheless, those involved are proposing to the court that they approve this settlement. And in the settlement, large numbers of folks, those people in Zone A in the settlement, do not have to prove causation. Likewise, none of the folks in the seafood industry have to prove causation. That is, that any of their damages were directly caused as a result of the oil spill.
We have the map up on the screen now, and you can see where Zone A is on the map, and Zone B. People in Zone A, they were the closest to where the rig explosion were.
Right. If you look at Zone A, you'll see that it is closest in proximity. It's the coastal zone. It's the area closest in proximity to where the well was, right, and where the impact, the visible oil, impacted the shore. And so Zone A folks are the closest in, if you will. And then, as you can see from the different colors, there's Zone B and C and D and on down the line.
And so right now, this settlement, this is the $7.8 billion settlement that we're talking about, potentially $7.8 billion settlement. And then prior to that, there was the $20 billion fund that Ken Feinberg oversaw. Now, for people who took advantage of that, are they included in this? Are they excluded from this settlement? How does that all work?
Right. Well, arguably they're still included unless they executed a full and final release of BP as part and parcel of what they received before. There are folks who are trying to challenge that, and they may very well be successful in their challenge of any release that somebody executed pursuant to the GCCF program.
Okay. All right. And one of the things that you said last week, which was really very, very interesting, you said in order for a class action lawsuit to be considered class action, there has to be commonality.
Yes.
Right? And there has to be something common to everybody who's involved in this case. But are there some variables that could affect this case in particular?
Absolutely. And the commonality here, Sean, and again, that's something that makes this case so unique, the settlement so unique. Because causation is out of the picture, the commonality now is damages. The fact that you sustained some loss, whether or not you can actually prove that it was as a result of the oil spill or not, is irrelevant for Zone A folks. Simply because you suffered some economic loss that you can prove by looking at your tax returns, your income statements, etc. You can prove that you sustained a loss. That's all you need to do. You don't have to prove that the oil spill caused the loss.
Well, let me jump in here, and maybe as an example, somebody sitting at home, they're watching this, and they're saying, well, you know, I owned a seafood restaurant, and business really dropped off. People didn't want to eat seafood for a while after the spill. I couldn't sell oysters to save my life afterwards, and I had a big decrease in business. And maybe as a analogy or a parallel, somebody who maybe worked at a seafood restaurant, they lost their job and they couldn't get a job and they couldn't pay their mortgage, and they had a domino effect, and a lot of financial catastrophe happened. And maybe they were in Zone B. Zone A is easiest because it's closest, and it's easy to understand that they were affected. Why don't you define for us how those people would proceed? They show up with their tax returns, they show up with their pink slips saying they lost their job. Why don't you walk us through that?
All right, two things to keep in mind there. All businesses in Zone A qualify, actually all businesses, period, qualify unless you're in oil and gas, banking, insurance, you're in the investment fund business, or you're a real estate developer, or you're a defense contractor. If you're not in one of those specifically excluded classifications, you qualify. So it's not just the seafood restaurant, it's the hairdresser, the bartender, the janitorial service
It
fellow.
sounds like everybody.
Everybody, right, other than one of those excluded classes. That's extremely important for people to remember and keep in mind, because they wouldn't normally think that they would qualify for this fund, but they do.
Zones A through what? Everybody applies. Every single zone.
No. Every zone, the folks who are excluded apply to all zones.
Right.
All right.
But everybody can apply for damages.
Yes. Okay. And it's only folks in Zone A that don't have to prove causation, or if you're in the seafood industry or some offshoot of the seafood industry, you don't have to prove causation.
Now, so is this why we could see potentially restaurants all over the state and other parts of the country taking part in this?
Well, not necessarily all parts of the country, Shorty.
Okay.
It's still limited by the zones as per the map,
Okay,
right?
okay.
But all of the state of Louisiana, for example, is in
Okay.
the map. So you could be a business in Shreveport or
Right,
Monroe
right.
or Alexandria.
Quick question. Suppose I lost my job in the seafood restaurant, but I got a job doing cleanup, and I made twice as much money. How does that affect the...
Well, you're getting into some of the particulars of individual circumstances that, again, the other thing to really keep in mind as to this settlement, it is extremely complex. And if I had one word of advice to anybody who even believes there's any remote possibility that they may qualify under the settlement or proposed settlement, seek out qualified counsel to represent you. And it's not just any Tom, Dick, or Harry that is out there.
But how do they do that then? Because we're running short on time. How do they do that?
They go and they search for folks who are familiar with the BP litigation, and CPAs, because you're going to need CPAs who are familiar with the different formula matrices and how to run the
A
numbers.
lawyer
as
can
to
help them find a CPA, though,
Absolutely.
Right? Okay.
How to run the numbers to maximize the amount of money that they'd be entitled to receive under the proposed settlement.
Okay, but we have to take a break right now, but we have many, many more questions. We're going to get our viewers involved this time around, involved in this discussion about BP and class action lawsuits. The viewer questions are coming up next, so stick around. We'll be right back. Welcome back, everybody. It's time now to take your questions for our guests. We've gotten some really great ones all week long, so we're going to get right to them. And our first question comes to us from Deb. She says, from your perspective, for both of you, has BP paid fairly? John, you want to start off?
Let me tell you, I'm not directly involved. I'm more tangentially involved, but I've studied it enough to know that there are many questions. There are more questions than answers. That's one reason I'm delighted to have Val here, because he's much more directly involved. So I've turned it over to Val.
What's your take on
Sean,
that?
I'd say unequivocally no. And if you ask the question as why the United States government, the states of Louisiana, Alabama, Mississippi, Florida have all objected to the settlement, they are unequivocally of the opinion that no, BP has not paid enough, and the extent of the damage caused by the largest oil spill in the history of the United States has not yet been quantified,
Right.
and that a serious problem with the settlement is that it places a limit, or a cap, if you will, on the amount of damages that BP would be held responsible for, and that is against the law. It is contrary to the Oil Pollution Act passed by Congress after the Exxon Valdez spill to make sure that there was unlimited liability for those who pollute our environment by the discharge of petroleum products.
Well, let me follow up on that and play devil's advocate here. On the one hand, I heard you say that it's so generous and you don't have to prove causation, and you don't, all you have to do is show how much money you're out individually or as a business. But in the next answer, it's so unfair. Reconcile those two comments.
That's the dichotomy that's going on here, John. And again, that's something that makes this settlement so unique in American history. On the one hand, you have a class of folks that have arguable claims. They may or may not ever prevail if they brought their claim in a court of law, who pursuant to this settlement are getting paid without having to prove that their damages were caused by the oil spill. On the other hand, you have folks who are arguably the most impacted, that being the state of Louisiana with all of its natural resources, the seafood industry, right?
Right.
They would have the easiest claims to make for damages that they sustained. And their damages are being capped. Their damages are being limited. Not necessarily all of them pursuant to this settlement, because the state of Louisiana still has its natural resource damage case separate and apart from this settlement. But nonetheless, the state has objected, and objected vehemently, saying that some of the findings of fact that the court could make in approving this settlement may negatively impact the state's claim. Lawyers like Stuart Smith, who have represented hundreds, if not thousands, of commercial fishermen, he has filed objections to the law, to the proposed settlement, saying, again, you're putting caps. There's arbitrary lines drawn in the sand. This claimant gets X number of dollars, and this one gets Y number of dollars. Why? It's based upon, one of the points that Mr. Smith makes is it's based upon visible oil. Well, what about the tens of millions of gallons of oil that, because of the use of dispersants, weren't visible,
Right,
but
but were there.
nonetheless are there
Yeah.
and impacted? I think by last estimates, there's still 150 to 160 million gallons of oil that is yet to be recovered. Well, what happened to it?
So there's some very positive, generous parts that we can say hallelujah about, but then there's some other things that are arbitrary and unfair, just that you can easily point to too. Is that the short answer?
And that's the short answer. And I think the word to the wise is, if you're in the seafood industry, if you're a commercial fisherman, you really need to think long and hard as to whether or not you want to participate in this settlement or not. If you're a hairdresser or a janitor or someone like that, you probably do, because you're going to get compensated and it's going to be easy for you to do so.
Yeah, but for those in the seafood industry, you don't know what the long-term effects are there. So you're really putting yourself in a box.
You're absolutely
essentially,
right,
is what you're
Sean, and
doing.
that's exactly what the Attorney General said in his objection to the settlement. We don't know yet. It's too early to quantify the loss. Don't make those in the commercial fishing industry make a decision before they have all of the information.
Okay, let's get to Terrence's question. He says, I see these commercials on TV that say, have you taken this drug? Or some of those commercials might be in reference to the BP oil spill. And he says, if so, you might be part of a class action lawsuit. How do you feel about those commercials? Are they legitimate? We've all seen those commercials.
Let me jump in, because generally my attitude is these commercials, they seem to have taken over the television set. Every time I'm up early in the morning, I'm making my coffee, it seems like every other commercial is some new class action.
Right.
I don't like them because it seems like it's a law firm I've never heard of, somebody from out of state. Or now I've heard of them because it's the same law firm, every other commercial, out of state. They don't know about Louisiana law and Louisiana and the rights for Louisiana citizens. And I think they're giving lawyers a bad name. It seems like they're hawking some lawsuit every other day, some new
Right.
lawsuit. I'm in favor of lawsuits that protect consumers against dangerous products, but I think Louisiana lawyers are in a better position to protect Louisiana citizens. Val?
I'd agree with that 100%. In my experience, Shauna, the vast majority of the national law firms that are advertising are really nothing other than clearinghouses. They take in a huge number of cases and they refer those out to the lawyers who actually are handling the litigation. You really don't need to do that. You can really find, if going on the internet is probably the easiest way, find lawyers who are actually involved in the litigation personally themselves. Those are the folks that you want to represent you, not some national clearinghouse that is really in it just for the money.
Okay, all right. Let's go to Ava's question. This comes to us via email. She says, is anything about the Deepwater oil drilling going to change as a result of the Deepwater Horizon spill?
I think that's if you had to look for something good to come out of the Deepwater Horizon's oil spill, the answer to that is unequivocally yes. If you look at the response of the industry, they certainly have reacted to all of the negative publicity associated with deepwater drilling. They certainly, the United States government and the states actually have mandated stricter guidelines, stricter safety measures. So I think the answer is yes.
Right,
You're gonna see a
lots
safer
of new
industry.
regulations in place as a
Yes.
result of that.
And I'll just add to that, you know, as much as trial lawyers are the punching bags of so many people and their jokes and everything, and I like a good lawyer joke, these lawsuits are one of the main things, more than anything else, more than legislation, more than, you know, moral boardrooms, that keep companies honest. And it's the lawsuits that force companies to change their ways and be safer because they don't want to be sued.
That's right. Okay, now this is a big question. We don't have that much time, so we're going to have to really try to keep it brief. But it's this question comes to us from Michael. He says, "What is the Restore Act, and will it benefit people in the Gulf South region?" That Restore Act is huge for all of the states.
Yes, the Restore Act was passed by Congress
Yes.
to make sure that 80% of the money in fines that BP is going to be ordered to pay goes to those coastal states that have suffered wetlands losses, et cetera. Louisiana tending to be one of the states, or will be one of the states, to benefit from the Restore Act. Actually, it's very interesting, though, because there's negotiations going on right now between the Department of Justice and BP as to whether or not those fines, upwards of $20 billion, are actually going to be paid pursuant to the Clean Water Act that would make sure that it qualifies for Restoration Act funds, or is going to be paid through the National Resource Damage Act that's actually tax deductible, number one, and number two, that would not qualify under the Restore Act for the states getting 80% of those funds. So it's actually very interesting to see what's going to happen in those negotiations, and pay attention to how the money is paid under Clean Water Act, which is good for Louisiana, or under the National Resource Damage Act, which is potentially very bad for Louisiana.
Right, and if you're involved in this case, in the BP case, pay close attention. November 1st is a very important date for folks. They've got to watch that. That's an important deadline that's coming up. But Val, we're completely out of time. Thank you so much for being on the program. That does it for our show this week. Thank you for all of your questions, and be sure to join John and us next week as we delve into expungements with Paul Bonin. He's the former traffic court judge and current judge on the 4th Circuit Court of Appeals.
Thanks to everybody watching at home and sending in their questions. Remember to check out the website, johnredmondpoa.com, and we'll see you next time.